Hello and a warm Collisions YYC. Welcome to my guest this morning, Mr. Dennis Plintz. How you doing, Dennis?
I'm good, Tyler. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh man, thanks for coming on. You and I have known each other indirectly for many, many years, and we were reconnected by a mutual friend, Mr. Dale Enns. I love Calgary conspires 1 degree of separation, as I seem to start every episode this way. You are a team lead at Plintz Real Estate and associate broker at Century 21. You are a residential real estate agent, and you are so much more than that. An Albertan, a third generation, someone who I know to be very enthusiastic about our province and about our community. So I see today's conversation going in a few different directions, but come on, who is curious about what's going on in the real estate space? So that was my quick intro. Please fill in the blanks for my audience. Who are you? What do you do? What blows your hair back? And let's get into this many-sided beast of a real estate conversation.
Super good. Now, where do we begin? We begin. So thank you. Third generation Calgarian. Just over 20 years as a residential real estate person. I think with years comes experience, and I've stayed in that lane despite temptations and being pulled out of it at times. I've stayed pretty close to right in it. I feel fortunate that I chose to be in it and found an amazing lane to be in. But prior to that, an extensive career in sales is how we put it in this household. I think growing up less than fortunate. My grandparents my granddad was a horse buster out in Sundre, Alberta. So he was an airplane mechanic part-time. And before that, we don't have much history because the Albertans 3 generations ago in my family were pretty scattered and they were farmers. So Mom and I moved in and out of Calgary, which is really relevant to why real estate's a big deal to me. We moved about 20 times before I was 10 years old in Calgary. We'd moved to BC part-time when I was really young. My mom married when she was really young and took off to BC. She'd actually run away from home when she was 13. So, story for another podcast, but I wrote it in a book that I put together after interviewing each generation. And when Mom moved away out of Alberta as a young mom and then ran away from BC and my dad, they were in a pretty tough relationship together, landed here in Calgary, set up roots. Mom worked, 3 or 4 jobs at a time. One of the strengths my mom, many that she's taught me, is she's never not had a job until she recently retired. And she taught me quite a bit about how to find safety, how to make sure that work came first for what we did, because not paying the bills is sometimes why we had to move. So moving 20 times was rental properties, in and out of bad relationships. And the good news of all of that in and around Calgary is I got to know the city extremely well, and there's not too many parts of old Calgary from COP to like Chestermere and each side of 16th Avenue that I know pretty well. And then that landed me in and out of a couple of high schools, 3 different high schools as well. And through that, I got to know lots of people in this city. Then I put myself into university. It's around the time we met, which is so crazy. And around that time, I went to university a bit later. I chose real estate, kind of chose me. I had a friend that did it, like many people that did something and did well at it. And I thought, if that knucklehead can do well at it, I got to have a shot at this. We're still good friends, by the way. And and that's a long answer to say 3 generations, multiple places in this city, have thought about moving elsewhere. And after this many years of being here, doing what I do, can't imagine going anywhere else.
I really appreciate that. I'm a new to Calgary 25 years ago, but I very quickly learned to call it home. And I think doing this podcast of talking to the people in the city that have got stuff on the go and are pushing forward, and the diversity of really what happens here. I loved it before I really fell in love with it, because when all you do is talk to people that are doing cool stuff, you get rose-colored glasses, and I choose to put those on every day. But real estate in Calgary has been a bit of a roller coaster. Like, you've been in it for a long time. I think if your LinkedIn is accurate, but 2004 roughly, is that a Do you have a date? Like when did you and real estate start dating? Is that about right? 2004?
That's correct. Yeah.
That's a, that's a long time. And there's been many cycles through that. Before we get into even a little bit, I guess it's always important to know where we are and where we got here. Where are we now? Like what would be your quick snapshot if you talked to somebody from abroad and they gave you a call and said, hey, I heard you're a real estate guy in Calgary. What the heck's going on there right now? What do you have a quick little elevator summary of like where are we now?
I do, John. It's so great that um, I think back to when I used to answer questions like this, like where are we going? Where are we headed? What do you think we should do, Dennis? I used to say, well, what I think, or how I feel. And
Yep.
I think if COVID taught us anything, it taught everybody that we don't know much for sure. And it was around that time I started saying, I don't know, like what do the stats say? So I try to, and our team tries to advise people that ask questions around residential real estate with some data, some stats. I think the picture is really clear today that I feel momentum, unlike I've ever felt in Alberta before. Number
Okay.
of calls, number of inquiries, number of out of province people coming here.
Mm-hmm.
It's really like a role, like it's flipped. And the data would tell us that as well. If you look at, net migration for Alberta, the strongest in the country last year,
Mm-hmm.
2024. If you look at vacancy rates, some of the lowest in the province, like less than 2%, probably less than 1%, which is frightening. Both of those stats combined impact a big segment of the industry. We work with a lot of healthcare
Yeah.
professionals. What I feel from them is a lot of pressure. What I know is
Okay.
happening data wise is like this is the land of opportunity right now, right?
Yeah.
And feels incredibly secure because the other statistical narrative around energy and the use of energy, where we get that energy, what we've got up north in Alberta, why we have it there, and the seemingly disappearing need for energy, 7 or 8 years ago as a topic, seems to have evaporated with the onset of the demand on AI and all that fun stuff. So the data there is
Mm-hmm.
frightening, like the number of servers and data. And so Alberta is really, really strong. Real estate prices will rise. Interest rates are dropping, which we don't need here in Alberta. Everybody likes cheaper money, but lower interest rates drive the market forward. They raised those rates 2 or 3 years ago to calm Vancouver, Toronto. It worked. The
Mm-hmm.
thing we miss in that equation, Alberta didn't need to be calmed. We're not a speculative market. So, man, I like waking up here like you. I'm glad I'm waking up here.
That's a great way to say it. That are we number three? Is it Vancouver, Toronto, Vancouver, then Calgary? Just for simple, rank and file.
Sorry, number three in terms
For
of what?
real estate, because obviously Toronto market's been out of control or it's been hot for years. Let's try to minimize let's use database terms than just feeling terms. Vancouver, anyone I know Vancouver, I'll wait for it to fall so I can get into the market, and that's not happened, to any large degree. Is Calgary just the next best option on that list? Where does Montreal sit? Not to speak negatively of any other cities in Canada, but it's pretty easy to think about Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, Montreal, maybe Edmonton, but at least then we're in the same province. That affordability and that view from the outside, is Calgary that, hey, we should go check that out if you heard what you can get there for the dollar kind of mindset? Dennis, I think you're on mute over there. Oh, there you go. I think you were. Okay. It's okay. It would have got caught. It would
Yeah,
have
is
got
that
caught
okay?
on your side, but yeah. Yeah, there
Yeah,
you're
is
back.
it
I
okay?
could see you talking, but I couldn't hear you. It's like, I think he's saying something awesome,
Yeah,
everybody. I just can't hear it.
it was the best part.
Oh man.
Affordability,
Okay. All right.
um, affordability and desirability. Those are two
Okay.
questions that people should
Yep.
marry. I do get asked, like, not asked, where's the most affordable place? Well, it's actually like St. John's, New Brunswick. Um,
I have a friend
where
who
do you?
just bought like a 4 bedroom house there for $315,000, or even less, or
Okay,
something,
so
290 or something.
so
Yeah.
so do you want to live in New
Yeah.
Brunswick? I've been there once, maybe not. And then if you go from the bottom of the list in terms of where can you afford the least expensive uh, single family residence, which again the data will tell you it's not Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, Calgary. That's the opposite way that you go. Um,
Okay.
where is lifestyle also going to meet to meet expectation. And let me flip that. When buyers come to us and say, "Hey," especially first-time buyers, we're thinking of buying a house. We often default to the experience we have as a team and start at, well, let's talk about what you do for fun. What's your lifestyle? What do you enjoy? And that should lead to where you decide to reside. Back to your question, though, if you look at, say, Regina, I think it's like the second most affordable place in Canada, or close to, like Regina, Saskatchewan. You can buy some really great real estate. I relocated one of my best friends and clients there last year, and he couldn't be happier from a lifestyle standpoint, except when he's going for a long run, because he's a runner and it's minus 32 and there's no, sign of that.
Yeah, there's no Chinooks. There's no Chinooks. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, there's no Chinooks. So correct what you said. Top 3 or 4 cities, depending on exactly which metric in terms of major cities. Toronto, Vancouver, depending on which segment, single family homes in Toronto, more of them more expensive. Vancouver, condo market, outrageous. Both of those cities have a deep desire to live in the downtown core. And insert Montreal very close to that as well, because they've got incredible downtown lifestyles. So when clients move here from there, we often start there and say, where do you live? And if they don't say downtown, we say, well, you're going to be okay. But if they say downtown in any other major city, they're going to be disappointed downtown Calgary, most likely, right? So Calgary is still super inexpensive. Average house price, $600,000 versus round numbers, $1 million in another major city, combined with our wages and employment. Great city, top 4, and we got a long way to go up before we start to hit that ceiling.
Are you starting to hear conversations, I guess, thinking about Calgary is, years ago when I started this podcast, we talked about like Western Canada, Calgary, Alberta, having a bit of a branding problem. Sometimes maybe a lack of awareness at the top level of brand. What is it? It's Hicks. Why would I move there? I've heard that is much less. I talked to the tech ecosystem, and it's like, it's a lot easier now to get talent to come here. Again, they're also very flexible and they often have remote work environments, but they're like, no, if we're looking to bring people here, they're a lot less fearful of moving to a Calgary. What the hell is a Calgary? Or, hey, if I move here, I get access to the mountains. If this job doesn't work out, I've got access to other opportunities. I've seen that shift pretty significantly in the last 5 years, even of doing that show. Do you find that in the conversations you're getting from people, net inbound migrators to Calgary? Is there a little bit more awareness around what the city is versus the fear of what it isn't?
That's so great. Oh man, I'd love more from you on what the creative space and or millennials and those folks think of it. Interesting. From experience, I would say one great client that moved here, in spite of all the things I had heard about Calgary a decade ago. Calgary did have a branding problem. I would suggest that I would go to places for bigger real estate conferences, and they would ask where we were from, and we could spit out some of our data. Like we'd be forced to speak at a conference as like the top team in this segment, and they do these houses. And I would try to explain that to somebody from San Diego, and they'd never heard of us. They'd never heard of Calgary, Alberta, Canada. But if you say Vancouver, Toronto, so yes, I don't know. I don't know if thinking that's a branding problem. I would say
certainly in awareness. So it's hard to move. What's the old joke in retail? If you can't go there with your mind, you'll never go there with your wallet. If you don't know where it is, you're probably not going to move there. I think would be a simplified version of that, totally. Of that same statement.
Totally. And I'd love to know what's really flipped that upside down. And that's available today. I know we were marketing in other cities. I saw some of those campaigns through our head office, through Century 21, through the government in Toronto.
Calgary Economic Development was doing some stuff, obviously for some pitches. Obviously, Travel Alberta, I'm going to actually have one of their senior VPs on to talk about where things are at, because they're marketing to the global economy from a tourism and travel. And I know there was a statistic around how many people moved here after a business trip or a tourism trip. Like, oh shit, what? I didn't know. And then it all of a sudden became in the consideration set. I don't know if that's an exact stat, but I've heard that said by many people, both in the business community and in the travel and tourism space.
Let me come back to a company too in a second that did relocate. But what you're saying reminds me of, I think we should as somebody that's concerned about too many people moving here, create some bumper stickers. Like if you love Calgary, Alberta, Canada, don't tell your friends.
I know,
You know, I have
best kept
friends that live
secret
in like
and all that, because we're developing big city challenges. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
That's right. But interesting, a lot of people won't know that some major companies like Garmin are headquartered here. They're actually headquartered in Cochrane, Alberta. Now, if you haven't heard of
Cochrane,
Calgary, you've
Alberta.
never heard of Cochrane for sure. And we did
Yep.
some work with some of the senior executives there, and I was so fascinated to learn that was a very strategic and calculated decision around their employee base, the target market. They wanted to be where they are, to be closer to fresh water, closer to the mountains, closer to the University of Calgary campus, so their employees could actually bike to and from work on a major road that's not dangerous. Like, you know, I get goosebumps when I think of that data set to set up one of the major companies in the world and say, where is there blue skies, clean water, good roads to bike on for our employees, and where are there great young students? Another great data point. Calgary, I don't know this year, the last 2 years, but during COVID, one of our clients shared a data set with me and a great podcast episode around somebody speaking at an oil and gas conference, not from Calgary, but talking about Alberta having more millennials per capita that return back to Calgary, Alberta, Canada after traveling and studying abroad.
Mm.
Why? Because of everything we just said, and it's affordable. So they go to Vancouver, they go to Toronto to learn, and they try to live, and you realize, and this is the swing that's happened, that demographic is big, like boomers
Yeah.
and millennials. So they've traveled abroad and went, I don't know, it's gray. I'm coming back, right? So you
Yeah.
got all them coming back, which means that Calgary fundamentally offers a tremendous amount. And then if you get into the last thing I'll mention is infrastructure. You know, thanks to previous administrations here, a few things we can say thanks for. One was setting up an incredible amount of infrastructure, you know, in and around 2010 to 2015, when we had growth like we do now. That cooled
Yeah.
off considerably when we had people leaving the province, you know, during the oil downturn of 14, 15, 16. And we didn't stop the infrastructure. So ring roads, hospitals, yeah, it's not a secret anymore.
Yes. No, you mentioned the comment earlier about less of a speculative market. Is that getting on the radar as well? Are you seeing investors from other cities or globally that are looking at Alberta? You know, I certainly know there was a period of time with one of our clients who's a large single multifamily home builder here in Alberta from a marketing perspective. Probably mid-COVID, 40 to 50% of our inbound marketing qualified leads were coming from Ontario area codes. And that was some of them
Mm.
like, I want to buy 5 sight unseen because I can get a standalone home on a lot on a corner with a garage for how much? And, you know, a little bit speculative. Some were moving here, some were doing it for investment purposes. Has that cooled down, or are you back to getting on radar? It starts to become a portfolio decision, not just a destination to live.
You know, we are fortunately not that province or city at the level Toronto and Vancouver have been.
Okay.
And
Okay.
like a lot of issues, I think Alberta's usually slowed to the game, if that makes sense. You know, as other cities have boomed. So some of the rules, particularly around, say, lending, that kicked into place as a result of the U.S. financial meltdown in 2007-8, Canadian banks quickly followed suit to imposed restrictions around how we would
Mm.
lend, loan to value ratios. So we're very fortunate to learn from those other provinces. But foreign ownership and land regulation in Alberta has always been governed pretty strictly, and things such as like
Okay.
skip transfer or skip title have really prevented it. But we're seeing more of it now. So certain buildings that are being built are being sold out because, in spite of the rules, there's always workarounds to those rules.
Yeah.
And in the same way we learn which rules to put in place in this province, we're hearing about ways people have worked around the rules in BC and Toronto, and we're seeing those show up here. So more speculative buyers now than ever before on some of these new projects, for sure, buying
Okay.
2 or 3 units at a time. So we're going to have to tighten the reins on that, I think.
I was reading recently, or I think it was on CBC. I become my grandfather, listen to CBC in the morning, that the rental market has come down. That, the first time since 21 that it's come down, I think 2%. Is that a cause and effect of some of those external, purchasers coming into the market, buying something as a rental property? Curious what's going on there, because certainly everything I was reading statistically around the price of a single family home to purchase is only continuing to go up 4 to 5% forecasted for next year. But the rental costs have seems like stabilized or come down slightly. Any perspective on what might be influencing that data?
Yeah, there were quite a few landowners back to 2014 and 15. A few of our calls were around land assemblies. They are every year, but in particular back then, they were some pretty big assemblies that people didn't know what to do with. Office towers made less sense, less corporate head offices being set up here. So we started to see a lot of big assemblies, which would in downtown Calgary be parking lots, come into question. Like, what do we do with these? And if you look at the purpose-built rental demand that came online, the amount of apartment buildings that prior to this, my career, like going back to the early 2000s, you didn't see a lot of buildings built for rental purposes only. And with the amount of land that landowners have assembled, a lot of buildings went up really quickly in the Beltline, really quickly, 2 or 3 years, that are now coming online to accommodate the need to fill those parking lots that downtown parkers were not using. And fortunately, we've got a serious amount of immigration, which, immigrants aren't necessarily buyers for their first few years on the ground,
Yep.
or those getting employment. So seeing rental rates come down, they're still really high. Like, the average minimal rental is like $1,800 in Calgary. $1,800 for a studio apartment is a lot of dough.
I think it's such a great example of hearing like, oh, they're down 2%, but to your point, yes, but still from a very high point. So let's kind of take that as like, oh, inflation has leveled out, but it hasn't gone backwards, right? All those increases are still baked into what we're dealing with every day. Is that what it is? $1,800 for is that like an average rent? And
yeah.
That's, I think I paid $600 for my first rental apartment, but I'm being old again. That was a long time ago. That was Calgary in 2001 on 58th by Chinook. 57th, actually. 57th by Chinook.
Let me jump to and that, if you look back to those types of rental rates, I mean, everything that far back, Tyler, you and I are getting a bit old, but that far back in hindsight, comparatively.
Guilty, Dennis, guilty.
Thank you. Comparatively to today's income makes the data stand like, wow, it's actually kind of frightening. $1,800 a month is sort of the minimal amount. That's the minimum amount you can get like a basement apartment. But let me jump to an opportunity that a lot of people today that you're going to see, and why you're seeing rental properties come online. There's a couple versions of a program called the National Housing Strategy. This was put in place by the federal government to accommodate the shortage of rental properties across the board. Again, in particular to major cities in the order that people like to be there: Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, now Calgary. So this loan program that we're participating in, that a number of our clients are participating in, is actually quite complex, but quite simple. The government will finance 95% for landowners, us, you, anybody that wants to build a minimum number of units, say 4 units, with no cap on how many units, 400 units. As long as you allocate a certain percentage of those, depending on which segment you're catering to, basically, the simple answer would be to low income or low rental. But that low rental is still $1,700 a month. So if you'll guarantee that, which we're doing on a project right now, you'll get on the other side of that 95% financing, 50-year amortization at a really attractive rate from the government. That's crazy. Right?
That is, I've got
so
a few
you're
conversations
seeing those
with some
buildings.
friends. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've had a few friends in BC that are looking, and that with changing with some of the bylaws around where and what you can build, it's certainly putting a focus on Calgary. I've heard from some outsiders. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because our land cost is so much less than other major cities, and the other rule of thumb we've got is if you've got an investor, you take them to the tallest building you can find in Calgary, and you look around and you see, how much land do they have to build on? And there's a lot of inner city land still that's undeveloped. Like we're not a big sprawling city. So, you take all of those initial factors that are the fun and friendly ones, like clean water and friendly people, and then you take the opportunity of buying land and purposing buildings, and then a government program, and it's kind of the perfect storm. And it's not that it's incredibly good because all of those factors are valid. In amidst that, there's a bit to be concerned about around the tightening of those rules because people are taking advantage of them and all that fun stuff. But the opportunity is real, the demand is real, and you're going to see a lot more buildings coming out of the ground.
Interesting. When you made the comment about Calgary not being a sprawl, not having a sprawling, I've heard it said the other that Calgary does have a bit of a sprawl problem because we have land. We don't have geographic barriers like oceans, major rivers, or mountain ranges like some other places, or built on the side of a massive lake. But then I hear you say like, yeah, we don't really have the densification. We don't really have that kind of situation. Is it just kind of matter of perspective, or just statistically speaking, where there's still a lot of land available, plain and simple?
Yeah, great catch there. Let me clarify that. It's concerning to me that we don't have sprawl, meaning we can keep going. We can keep going like past Okotoks. So we can keep going. Like there's talk of joining Edmonton with a high-speed rail train. There's so much vacant land. Now that land is opportune for something. An amazing lady I'm a big fan of, Danielle Smith, has a great argument. If you've listened to her talk about where to put affordable housing, you put it where there's affordable land versus repurposing inner city land where the doctors and physicians and EMTs and police and stuff kind of need to be located. So Calgary's got a lot of room to grow, which is one of the reasons someone say, well, don't invest in a city that has lots of room to grow, because the value of the land can be spread out a little more evenly, and they can keep spreading it out. But the reality of where people want to be and choose to be is still closer to inner city. In spite of Calgary not having the most amazing, direct downtown core, we've got a really amazing corridor in the Beltline around the core. So yeah, the reality that we can sprawl is there, but the demand for where people want to be, especially back to immigration, when you look at our public school system and the number of students in most public schools that have, added 30, 40, 50, 80% capacity over the past 3 years, the most likely and probable place for immigrants to land is inner city, right? Close to LRT, close to infrastructure. So until our infrastructure system, which is getting way better with the ring road, really catches up to some of those areas, you won't see the city move in that direction as quickly.
Yeah, because then you can start to get into the complexity of tax base, densification, infrastructure, how you fund it, how you support it. I get it. I live in Marteloup, South Calgary specifically, and there's a lot of densification happening right now, and you get a lot of complaints. But if I put on my business hat, it makes a lot of sense because we've got to pack more people in. We've got to get more dollars per square foot from a taxation perspective, because the cost to run a city isn't getting cheaper. So it's hard to be frustrated by one just from day to day sometimes, to looking at the reality of it. If we want to live in a sustainable city, there are some things that have to happen to make it sustainable for the long term. It's an interesting balance when you put on multiple hats, the community member, the citizen, but the person who maybe also has a long view on Calgary being an amazing city. There's some things have to happen that might be a bit bumpy along the way. Letting out my personal views there a little bit.
Well, as a resident of I grew up in those areas. It's really hard to be in my business, I think, and not be pro development. But at the same time, there's, like everything, there are better or best ways to grow certain things, right? So planning, infrastructure, all does come back to. I love that you touched on taxes, because that's what drives, caps, leads all of it. So how those tax dollars and subsidy dollars are getting allocated or spent needs to also be a part of that conversation. But like inner city development is happening. There's no stopping it. The mandate of our local, provincial, and beyond governments. Bit of a change in that recently, but regardless of
yeah,
that,
recently, I think we're 24 hours deep on that one right now. But this will air in a few weeks. But we all know what just happened yesterday at the federal level.
Correct. So if you take a look at the implications that will have on some of those other bigger levels of lending infrastructure, it will for sure. But the demands and the pressures that exist in this local province are there, and we've got to meet them. And I think with some proper planning and some really great leadership, we're gonna get there. But between now and then, the $600,000 price point in Calgary, up to the upper end of the price point of just replacing some of those houses, which is another thing we can touch on. A really good metric for investment or growth is the replacement value of an asset versus the resale price of that asset. And
okay,
because of inflation and when people ask about first off, when people ask about becoming landlords, I've got a long narrative on the fact that yes, everybody should own real estate, but only a few of us should be landlords. So if you're going to answer that question with bravery and say, okay, I'm built to be a landlord, that's good. The second part of that though is, well, what makes sense to be a landlord? And the whole idea of cash flow positive, I don't think is a rational, relevant place to start. As a landlord for 20 plus years, very few times do I start cash flow positive on buying an asset. In fact, it can be a decade before we're actually cash flow positive. However, the inherent fact of inflation is what makes landlords wealthy. So, an asset today, back to why should somebody buy in Calgary versus Toronto, right. Why be a landlord in Calgary versus Toronto is, if you take the cost to build a house in a suburban community or an inner city community, and you look at that cost, you go to a builder or you go to a show home and say, how much is a new house here? And they say 600,000. And then you get in the car with me and you drive around. And if I can find you a house in that community that's 550,000, which I will, or lower than that, it'll tell you there's room for those prices in resale to rise, right? So it's pretty simple to say, which cities can you buy houses below replacement value? And those are the cities like Regina where there's a lot of room to grow, because the thing that doesn't change in each of those cities is the materials. I mean, it's just as expensive. To build that house.
I like it.
Yeah. So why is Regina so cheap? Well, it's back to demand. So then you look at Calgary and the demand is so strong. Something's got to give, right? That toggle is going to move up. So it's a crazy, interesting number to study, and Calgary's got some room to grow.
So what I'm hearing you say is that although, yes, it feels expensive because it's more than it was, when you look at it from a different filter of data, it actually still has a lot of good opportunity here.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
And I appreciate it. I've had a lot of friends, that are landlords or contemplated it. And it's always that cash flow conversation that comes out, not necessarily what's the potential upside appreciation of the asset over time, or how much are you willing to fund that, because you're actually then just investing in what will be a greater rate of return and so on and so forth. But the cash flow positive conversation seems to be the first and foremost chat that I hear and that I've been involved in.
And here's the other one. So then I love this part of why, again, so lucky to wake up in Alberta. I look at where we've looked at buying some real estate, and average house price in Regina is $300,000. And if you look at how much that city grows, like 1% a year, 2% a year. Okay, even in boom times, you got 3%. What a great market. Now, the pullbacks are few and far between because the demand of that demographic. And then you look at the swings in Calgary, up 6 or 8 or 11%, and then we're down 13%. But if you look at investment in real estate as we've had to learn, meaning I didn't understand this when I started, it's a long-term approach. There's a lot of times I would say simply to a client, they say, well, I have $500,000 to buy a rental condo, and my mortgage payments and everything else in is going to cost me, $2,000 a month, but I can only get $1,700 a month for rent. I say, well, it's not cash flow positive. And they say, well, so I don't want to buy it. I say, okay, you're going to lose $3,000 a month. $3,000 a month over the next year, assuming no vacancy, $300 a month.
300, yeah. 3,000 might dig a bit of a deeper hole.
You're going backwards. You're going backwards really quick. So $300 a month, $3,600 a year, call it $4,000. If you can squeak out with no vacancy, you're off $4,000. if you look at your $500,000 purchase price that appreciates 5%, right? That's not cash flow positive, but that's a net positive gain.
Yeah.
And if you look at that year over
Back
year,
to the fact that if you're playing the long game, not this short, quick fix mindset that sometimes gets tied to real estate during boom times, right?
it's amazing.
Yeah.
Nailed it. So the other scarier part is one of our team members yesterday was telling me they were out looking at some houses on the weekend. And the downside of this boom is those quick buck landlords flips. If you really look, you don't have to really look, but if you're not somebody trained, you really look at the quality of what those quick flip, make 30, make 40 grand opportunities are. The few that can do that business well, God bless them, they don't do it well. They just are able to get in and out and make a profit. They don't leave a good product at the end.
Yeah. They
right?
leave a piece of junk on the market. Yeah.
Oh, it's craziness. So that's unfortunately what results in a low inventory market. That stuff will still sell. Somebody uneducated, somebody under some pressure. There's a lot of factors right now that have created, a very volatile market that if you don't have a lot of time to do due diligence, which a lot of people don't, the quality that's also coming out of a boom cycle is questionable.
Well, you can almost look at the quality of the house in Calgary by the age and which boom cycle it was in, right? I've heard that armchair statistic thrown around.
Totally.
What you're saying, Dennis, is there are bad actors in the real estate game. Is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and lots of them. Like Instagram's a pretty great place to see a lot of the renovations gone wrong and stuff you just can't believe. The stuff that's even scarier though is the stuff they find that's an issue, and I don't want to say gets covered up as often as it just gets worked around. And you just don't know. You don't know till you do know. But overall, if you look at investment real estate, being a landlord, which somebody said to us, one of the first houses we bought, you should actually, consider living at home while you buy your first rental. If someone else is helping subsidize your rent, you're going to help subsidize somebody else's. But what an incredible thing, right? To have a family piece of real estate that you used your son's allowance to go buy, right? Like it's,
that's truly thinking about it. That's truly thinking about it from an investment mindset, not as like, you've got to live somewhere, figure that out over here. But if you want to be a real estate investor, figure that out over here, but separate the two, at least into the right lanes. I don't think that's always advice that gets floated around to, again, sophisticated investors that are, it's a choice, it's a portion of the portfolio that's different. But individuals like, I think I should have a rental property. That's where I think this conversation is really valuable.
Totally. You nailed it. The idea of everybody should own real estate, but not everybody should have to be a landlord, has come after successfully being a landlord, but only successful with a lot of help, like moments of being a landlord where, it all gets questioned. But at the same time, waking up a number of years later to go, wow, look what inflation's done, because in all segments of investment that I've tried and dabbled, the one place I keep coming back to is what you just said. We've all got to really live or work somewhere when it's minus 31 degrees, right? So where is that? And driving my son to school yesterday, we're looking at all the buildings along McLeod Trail with vacancy signs right now. The other side of the coin that we are paying close attention to, living somewhere is one thing. Working somewhere, that's an interesting question. Look at where we're working today, right?
100%. Both from the comforts of our home offices. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. These mortgage payments, which we didn't touch on, being a landlord just means you have a lot of mortgages most of the time. It looks good.
We didn't talk about the vehicles and the mechanisms. It's easy to sound like you're just whipping out 500 grand in cash. That's often not what's happening.
Correct. There's great conversations around leverage and how that continues to get easier and easier if you can do it long enough. But back to driving up McLeod Trail with my son and looking at buildings, and we have these talks about, like, I feel bad for all the lights that are off in the buildings because it's hard to be a landlord, and I actually could almost cry when I think about people that have invested everything to be a landlord of a building they built on a property their grandfather bought, and they had 3 great tenants and they ran their mechanical business out of the back shop. And all of a sudden, 3 of those tenants moved out.
Yeah.
Back to residential real estate though, the safer space seemingly forever to own something is where people have to live.
Yeah. because work
crying
from
about real estate.
work from home is optional, but live from home is kind of an oxymoron. It's that you're saying the same thing. Absolutely. You know, as an organization that went to full remote during COVID, like everybody, and we bought in, we sunk into it, and all of our team works from home. And you know, our small company was $250,000 of rent that I'm not paying, but I'm also not giving to a landlord. And that was a landlord in Calgary and a landlord in Toronto. So that, like, and that space sat vacant in Calgary. I think it's still vacant now. The space we moved out of that we were in for 10 years prior.
Tyler, it's so rad because the other place I get challenged, you know, is statistically there's a huge movement. Uh, company name agnostics, but two big company friends last week, back to work has been ordered since COVID. Okay,
Amazon just pulled it yesterday, I think.
Correct. Big company. I don't have any friends that own that company, but other local oil and gas companies, law firms.
Yeah.
What a wild swing. I totally get it. However, Alberta's entrepreneurial, so small businesses, you know, you and me, and even small retail shops, like, what a wicked space. When you look at the inner city rezoning that's happening, building we just repurposed where the per office rent for people that are like this hybrid of like WeWork meets big company. There's like a hybrid of people that like us that tried WeWork and well, I don't like strangers every day. That's kind of weird. The coffee's bad. The building's tricky. It's still in a big thing.
Yeah.
So clients were coming to me, sophisticated investors saying, you know what? I'm whatever age at the time, a friend of mine was say 65, successfully retired. He's like, you know, I meet my buddies for coffee every Saturday. You know, I think someone like you, like thinking I do it all, said, should have these like little cool places that we kind of own something in. Like we go work, it's our place, we got it designed for us. And that went from idea to a couple spaces we looked at, we repurposed one, and he was correct. Like there's these boutique business owners that don't want to be trapped with the dog barking in the background, or, you know, spouses want them out of the house, all these fun things. I just want to go work somewhere. I still want to be inner city. You can buy a residential property. You can live in the basement. You can rent 3 offices upstairs. Wild to think about $400,000 house, 2 offices rented at $1,000, and the guy that owns it lives in the basement. It's crazy. Because commercial tenants are great. They're only there during the day.
They're only there during the week. They're not there on the weekends. They don't throw parties.
Yeah, it's cool hybrid. So a lot of people are repurposing at an opportune time when the ideals of the government are to accommodate more people, more work at home businesses, higher density, more zoning. Super good, a good perfect storm.
I love the creativity. I love the flexibility, and I love the individual. Like we live in an individualized, personalized world, as we all have our personalized news feeds and our devices in our hands. And so we want things the way we want them. And I do love the fact that COVID really opened up the realm of possibility, which then you're saying is like, yeah. And look at the blowback into the real estate space of all these people wanting something different. But now there's a level of permissibility that maybe just wasn't there not that long ago. Like we are a full remote team, and we don't have one client that like could give a shit. Honestly, they get better staff from wherever they need to be, and we show up at their office whenever we need to, which for them is usually not that often because half the time they're not there either. And it's been an interesting, but that just wasn't permitted back in 1920 the same way as it is now. Like permissibility is a big thing. And what I heard you say was there's permissibility, but now this demand for, well, yeah, I kind of want a unique formula that's like this. Great. Let's do that for you. That's pretty exciting. Like, that gets me excited as an entrepreneur as well.
Totally. Good word, permissibility. Like, you know, it takes a long time to undo a way of living. You know, if we've lived like a generation of people that went and worked downtown, and my son won't know that generation. He can't fathom, you know, waking up on a Tuesday during his summer holidays and dad's not home. What a weird, like my grandpa would be like, so everything all right? Did you get a job? Like, are you okay? And so it's now almost a full generation of being normal.
Well, it's funny. It's almost like we're going full circle in certain ways. And I say full circle way back. I grew up rural. I grew up on a farm, but my dad worked in the yard. Like, so I went to work with my
Yeah.
dad when I was 6 years old, hanging out, and there was the factory generation and, those, if we want to take a look at industrialization. But if you go back far enough, everybody kind of worked from home to a certain extent, right? And they found a way to either it was a craft or a trade, and it was the whatever, the foundry, you're a blacksmith out behind your house, you're a farmer and you go to your shop. I don't know. I kind of grew up that way. So I look back at it now and go, wow, what a privilege. At 6, I could hang out with my dad because my dad worked at home. Might be 3 farms away in a field that's, down the road. But it's just some dynamics there that are very interesting when you think about your son of like, oh, I can bounce in and say hi to dad, or we can take 20 minutes and go for a walk. Like the quality of also from a family perspective that creates, oh man, I don't have kids, but I get it. That sounds pretty great.
Yeah, no, whether the way you phrased it to me before, we've talked a lot about metrics, and I understand productivity and the concern of a lack of productivity. I think the bigger the company goes, the lack of mentorship or understanding how somebody truly leads a group is really hard to understand remote. But if you remove those pieces and find a way to find if they're a cultural fit, to find out how they do lead, problem solving, which is easier when you just look over the cuticle and you have a senior partner to ask. I get that one part of the argument, but the biggest part, the cost of trying to maintain that status quo versus just simply measuring what small to medium businesses get to measure easier than big companies, which is profitability, and be obsessive about performance and just be okay that, Susan produces X number of widgets and the quota I have for Susan is lower than that. But somebody told me Susan only works, 4 of the 7 hours we pay her. I mean, I don't know, like if the numbers are there and the growth is there, we know the numbers that it takes off the balance sheet to maintain the old way of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's like this wild time of transition that, equals the privilege of being whoever.
I love that. Equals the privilege. Yeah, well said. Yeah.
Yeah. And with whoever you want to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think
that if people don't waste
Go ahead.
No, go for it.
Just so much of none of it's easy. And if we put them all back in the office, then culture will be great. No, you have to still be deliberate. No. We put them back in the office, then they'll be productive. They won't. They don't plan their vacations or do their taxes while sitting at their desk in their office. They must only do that at home. Like there's some ridiculous assumptions or some statements that I think get made, or holy shit, we invested in this office space. We got to pull people back, but we're going to tell them it's because of culture. Be honest.
So good.
Working from home is challenging. Motivating, aligning, working with a group of people. No matter what, it's got its challenges, and you just got to lean into whichever it is. But pulling people back to the office isn't the universal, hey guys, hey gang, it wasn't working perfect before. Let's be clear. Let's be crystal clear.
So well said. Like it challenges me to think that the client I was talking to about this, where I was fascinated by them ordering everybody back to work. And he said, because we're trying to mentor and we're trying to promote people to be senior in the company. And it's harder to do that remotely because we can't see and whatever I said, so you can't basically see or tell, if they smell bad or if they're just rude. But to your point, well, maybe they lead better remotely, but you put them within a group and then the, employee retention drops through the floor because I don't know, like if the company's working and profitable and growing, which so many did through this, it's working, right? So it's interesting.
And it's always up for review. There's a level of personalization and expectation at that individual that they want to be treated like an individual. For some of our team that didn't like that remote, they self-selected. But from a recruiting perspective, the first question is, you're not going to trick me, right? You're not going to force me back because I know what it takes to be remote, and I'm willing to pay with the privilege of I'll be a little better communicator and I'll check in a little bit more and I'll do there's no such thing as over communicating when you work remote. But the privilege I get of being able to throw in a load of laundry at 2 p.m. and have that freedom to be with my family. I can work 10 minutes later and still be home 5 minutes early. Some people really like that value exchange, and that's all part of pulling that formula together. And some organizations, and there are some factors where meeting in person, there's no supplement for it. But you can also find ways to make that happen too. Like I'm all in on what I chose, but I'm not blind to the whole deal, right? You've got to buy the package, right?
Yeah, and so I'll bring it back to the opportunities I'm seeing with a different type of collaboration. So, interestingly, a lot of the single family assets inner city that aren't necessarily ready to be torn down, but are in prime belts like Mission, 17th Avenue, Lower Mount Royal, have been repurposed into true co-working space where they are dissimilar businesses, but complementary services. Okay. So you take a real estate company like ours that needs a photographer, a social media expert, a lawyer, a lender. All four of those in one particular case all run their own business with their own clients and their own staff, need a place to work, but not a big one. They don't need, any bigger than an office or two. Give them that office or two and put them down the hall from our office, where when our clients need them, they're just down the hall. When I have a problem to solve, they're just down the hall. So these houses that normally would have one family are getting repurposed to have four families, like four businesses, right? And then the real wicked ones, like I said, are the people that will then live in one of those offices somewhere in that building, and be so net positive because the way the financing will work with such low interest rates, it's so really complimentary to have that set up. Take some creativity to do it. The other end of the extreme is repurposing a whole office tower to try and make it residences. Right?
Yeah, we've got 3 or 4 of those kind of on the go right now in Calgary, don't we?
Yeah, and more in the pipe.
More in the pipe.
And then the one that seems to be surfacing, that is reading the tea leaves a bit, but in the news yesterday, is taking a real anchor, actual business in there that will pay for the building and then purpose the tenants around that service. Because trying to make an old office tower into an apartment is super expensive. But if you take a bunch of people that need to live somewhere and need to live affordable, and put them above a Costco, is different than putting them above, an Enron or somewhere that they don't get to benefit from the services that are immediately available. Wicked to see that happening.
No one really benefited from Enron, but that's another conversation.
Correct. But then in any business, I was thinking like an oil and gas company.
I know what you mean. I just love that you picked that
like
on.
A thriving business. Yeah.
The raging example of corporate impropriety in the last 20 years.
Yes. It helps nobody.
Yeah. No. Especially their constituents. But anyway, sorry. I'm just picking on Enron.
You're awesome.
I really love so we got to get into this weird work conversation for anyone who's still listening. I appreciate you hanging on. But the diversity and the variability in what is to be involved in real estate, and how we as consumers, our tastes, our preferences, our needs are changing, and how that takes something you can't get much more concrete than a building, than a piece of dirt and some sticks and some concrete and some walls. But what I loved and what I got really excited about hearing you talk is, like, not only is there opportunity in Alberta, but there's some creativity that's going on. We're repurposing over here. We're putting a bunch of people together that removes friction for the customer and maybe friction for the business. We're looking at the fact that we have a geography that allows us to stretch and grow, that maybe it can accommodate some of this influx of net new migration. It's really exciting to me to look at all of the sides of the coin. That is, oh, Dennis, don't you just sell houses? What I took away is, it's not that simple, because there's so much opportunity and so much diversity in the demand, the need, and the supply. That's pretty exciting, not only in Alberta and everywhere, but it'd be hard not to get excited about this asset class.
Yeah. And I think being able to ask a number of questions from anybody that wants to get into this asset class. It's a very easy thing to transact a piece of real estate. Somebody wants to buy for whatever reason, find them something to buy, and you put them in it. If we can back out a little bit, which we've obsessed over as a deeply curious guy who likes to ask a lot of stupid questions, I can't help myself but say, okay, tell me more about why. Where are you from? What's your family? Where do you think you'll be? What's your backstory? What's your future story? Like, tell me more. Like, why did you pull up in that type of vehicle? Where are your primary decision makers? Like, all of these other things can lead us to help put together a bigger picture for a client, whether it's being very strategic as an investor and understanding how targeting one of the assets I just talked about might actually be better served by looking at an assembly. So let's target the 2 or 3 buildings around the one you want to buy. That's complex, that's investment, that's exciting, that's creative. But the other one is when somebody says, you know what, all I can afford is this little single family house. And in fact, the very first single family home we bought outside of the one we lived in was for a family member to rent, but we target it with that other conversation I just said in mind, which was, what's our long-term picture? Well, I want to be a landlord of multiple units. I think that the future of owning a piece of land is redeveloping the land into something bigger. So we targeted an area and a street where the one house that we bought turned into 7 houses over a decade. So the creativity that can spring from questions we ask and have the courage to answer. The other side, let me simplify it, Tyler, is when someone says, hey, I'm in this new relationship. I've got this great boyfriend. He's awesome. We're going to buy a place. We know enough to say, okay, well, let's back up. Like, I love that, but I love you enough as a friend to say, have you talked to a lawyer? You know, have you made sure that this asset class, this most expensive mortgage you're ever going to get, most likely is set up properly? Not safe, but just set up properly, because ultimately it's risky, right? It's a lot of money to risk. So yeah, the inquisitive nature of what we get to do in our industry should be evident in the questions that get asked by the clients we get to work with.
Dennis, I feel like that's a mic drop moment right there. That was great.
Okay.
And the round of applause breaks out as he ever vote for Dennis. No, I do appreciate though the perspective, because I'll maybe throw this in here at the end if people are still listening. Sometimes real estate agents feel like a dime a dozen. A lot of people got into it for a lot less serious reasons than you did, or the lifetime commitment. And it does feel like something that people can pop in and out of. And as a consumer, not only is it important to know what assets you're buying, but who helps you on that journey. I think that that's a huge and a very important decision. And I look back and then I think about now having the network and knowing people, and that would feel like such a safer choice now that maybe the first time where I was like, I don't know, this person's aren't all real estate agents created equal. There is a little bit of buyer beware there as well, of not only the asset, but who's helping you, I think.
Yeah, let me back up and come clean. Like it's not why I got into the business. I got into the business, as I say to people, when I say to people in our industry, I got into the business the same reason a lot of us did, which is to make money.
That's fair.
And chose something that quickly showed me it could be a lot of money. Selling my first house, which was a $5,000 commission while in university. I left class, skipped the rest of the day, and went and closed, on a house that I ended up having to sell 3 times. So I think I might have lost from the 5K, but I quickly learned, Tyler, that in any of our industries, when the ability to be profitable, because it's not a high profit business, the risks, like all of us, to be a business owner and wake up every day and do what we do. If it's just transact, the barrier to entry is low to get in. The barrier to convert is low when the market's as strong as it is. But to stay in it for a decade or 2 or 3 or 4 cycles, it's where I look to any of my service providers, you or our elevator service guy that was dealing with me yesterday. When they've been around for a couple decades, they're in it for a different reason, either because they're really, really good at it, which means they're recognized and celebrated and sought after, which usually means they're compensated for that. Not all industries, though. My dry cleaner still charges me the same thing they charged me 20 years ago, essentially. And I still use them because the service side is there. My point is, getting into something like all of us as young people is exciting. And I do for sure think, and one of my next decade assignments is to help rework the barriers to get into this industry, to really just prepare us that serve the customer to ultimately protect the customer, because the situations that are arising around the world today, the pressure that's on the residential real estate industry to get back some of the commission that we were given, another topic, is real. The lawsuits, the demands that thankfully are just like your business. Expectations from customers need to be recognized. And in small businesses, that happens simply by not going back to that restaurant. But in big industries,
you decide with your wallet. Yeah, you decide with your wallet.
Yeah, right. So, so where we get where I get excited every single day is to do what we try to do, not say um, we, I was ideal. I had all the right ideas when I started the business, but to say I've gotten better ideas as I've moved along in the business. And that's a result of how customers show up and repeat and go, man, I'm glad we dodged that bullet, or I can't believe you helped us solve that problem. Um, the industry is ripe for change, but so amazing for opportunity because the stakes are so high in it, right?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Dennis,
I
so
was just
good to
trying to
chat.
get out of the
Yeah,
sorry, I
yeah.
was just trying to get out of the compliment you gave me that we try to earn the applause, Tyler, is the bigger part of it, right? And it's so much easier when the industry surrounds you with a team. Like if we could have the last thing I'll say on this part of the soapbox is more mentorship in every industry helps everybody. Like real gray hair people that have been around a long time that can bring in younger industry members to say, wait, before you go down that path and burn out or get sued or get in trouble, let's work collectively on the big conversations. And mentorship is being pushed in our industry, but at the same time it's being pushed back on because it's cheaper to just put people into an industry, churn them out, and then have them serve customers. But customers are pushing back, saying, "Wait a minute, people need to be far more experienced before, because they're not in the course in the educational before." I just simply choose them because I heard they were a real estate guy or
Yeah,
girl,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Back to your
Sorry.
point about the low barrier to entry and what it really takes to do the job well. And,
Yeah, I
and
think
and
so.
what should be table stakes from a consumer perspective to make sure you don't get yourself in trouble. Because what you
Correct.
don't know can hurt you in this industry.
Yeah, a lot. A lot.
Yeah, yeah, a lot. Well, there we ended on a very serious, very stern note. Dennis, how do people get a hold of you? What's your favorite in all the ways that exist in the world? What's your favorite?
Any way they can find me. I say our core value is responsiveness. Phone calls are so underrated. 403-608-1112 is my number. I bought that. I paid for that number, Tyler, 20 years ago.
I like it.
Paid to have any. And just Plintz, Plintz. There's only a couple of us that are still around and not in trouble somewhere in the world. So find me this one. And I'm a local one anyway in Calgary. Got
Yeah,
some crazy,
I do see the odd
crazy
bus
roots.
bench with your name on it. And are you a LinkedIn guy? Does the LinkedIn community work for
Yep.
realtors? Yeah,
Yeah. LinkedIn.
imagine that's where my audience hangs out pretty heavily. So that's why I was curious.
Love it.
Yeah. Dennis, thanks for your candor. Thanks for the conversation. Thanks for sticking with it. And I love chatting with people that have no, I chose this industry for whatever reason, but I also chose to stay in it for these variety of other reasons. And I really appreciate that. And I like the perspectives you added today. So thanks for your time.
Awesome, Tyler. Thanks for having me.
Cheers, man.